This will be a video explaining how to do some of the 3.3 Aplia exercise sets dealing with informal fallacies. We're going to start with appeal to unqualified authority. Now just a quick note here on this, that it's generally the case for inductive arguments that if you're using the word of an authority as a reason to do or not to do something, that's okay. If you're making an inductive argument where you say something to the effect of, okay, this authority figure or expert in this particular area is claiming that this is how we should do it, so that's probably the way we should do it, that's fine. So imagine you go to the doctor and the doctor says, well, look, here's what's wrong. I think you've got this disease, and here's the course of treatment that I would recommend. Well, given their expertise in that area, what you should think in that case is, well, because this expert in the area, this doctor who has lots of experience and has done research on this, has told me this is what I should do, then I should probably listen to them. It's not a guarantee that what they said is right or that you should do it, but it's pretty good evidence that you should. The fallacy is when you appeal to an unqualified authority. That is an individual that has either no expertise or knowledge, or has expertise or knowledge, but it's not really relevant to the thing that you're using them for. So let's take a look at some of these passages. They want me to figure out whether this is an example of a fallacy in the first place, just like the earlier exercise sets, and then if it's that particular appeal to unqualified authority case. So for passage A here, we have scientists who have carefully studied the relationship between carbon emissions and global warming, believe that they have conclusively established the former causes the latter. So former causes the latter here just for language. The former is what happens earlier, the latter is what happens later. So the former is that it's carbon emissions causing the global warming. Therefore, if we are to limit the negative effects of global warming, we must reduce our carbon emissions. Okay. So if I'm picking whether this commits a fallacy or not, I'm going to say no, it doesn't. Because even though I don't think this is a great argument, the wording in the conclusion is again way too strong for an inductive argument. We must reduce our carbon emissions. We don't know we must, but it looks like that's probable. If there's an error here, it's in the wording of the conclusion and not in the link between the scientists, who are a legitimate source of authority in this area, and the ultimate conclusion you're drawing. So not an appeal to an unqualified authority, because the scientist would be qualified to give evidence on this particular case. Okay, let's see if we can't find another one. Let's go to D. This is a useful one. Chelsea is a fantastic guitar player. A cello is a stringed instrument, just as a guitar is a stringed instrument. So Chelsea is probably a fantastic cello player too. All right. So this one does commit an error in the reasoning, right? You should be thinking, well, just because she's good at playing the guitar, which is a stringed instrument, it's quite a bit different than the cello, which uses a bow and is a stringed instrument. Like, these are very distinct stringed instruments. So she's probably not also fantastic at cello just because she's good here. That's fallacious. But it's not an appeal to unqualified authority here. We're not using the word of somebody who says, well, look, I'm an authority on cello playing. She looks like she's good, so she is. Instead, what we're appealing to is a bad analogy. Right? So we've got a failed analogy here between guitars and cellos. So it does not commit appeal to unqualified authority. Let's see if we can't find one here that's going to do it. Let's look at B. Francis Crick was a world-renowned molecular biologist, physicist, and neuroscientist who won a Nobel Prize as one of the discoverers of the structure of DNA. Crick was also an avowed atheist who publicly argued that God does not exist. If someone like Crick said that God does not exist, then God must not exist. Okay, so this is one, yes, definitely an appeal. Or excuse me, definitely a fallacy. And this could actually go two ways, but this is going to be one of the cases, right? So this is a two-parter. Here we've got somebody who has expertise in a particular area, but then they're giving advice in an area where they're not an expert, and we're taking it as though they are. That's an appeal to unqualified authority for sure. All right, because Crick is not an expert on whether God exists or doesn't just because he's an expert in biology, physics, and neuroscience. The other thing that is also the case here, this might be an appeal to ignorance, where I'm saying, well, look, because somebody says this does not exist, they must not. There I might be thinking it's a lack of evidence that's driving this. I could see an argument being made for that, but it's not really clearly that. What this is most clearly is that appeal to unqualified authority. Okay, let's look at some other ones. Appeal to ignorance, the next one up. So appeal to ignorance, the hallmark of this case is that somebody says, look, there's no evidence for this, therefore it must be false, or there's no evidence against this, therefore it must be true. Right? I mean, I guess you don't have to use the must be or the in either case. It could be probably or likely. The error is that somebody takes lack of evidence as evidence that something doesn't really exist or does exist, when all we should recognize as lack of evidence shows lack of evidence. Right? There are numerous cases in history you could point at and say, look, in the past, there was lack of evidence that the Earth was a sphere. Right? We just didn't have any evidence to suggest that it was. And in fact, all of our evidence was pointing to it being flat. But that lack of evidence didn't show conclusively then that the Earth was not a sphere. Right? In fact, we were wrong about that despite the lack of evidence. Okay, so let's take a look at passage A and look for that link between lack of evidence proving that something doesn't exist or does. So every time I'm awakened by the alarm at the fire station down the street, I learn that a fire has broken out nearby. If we want to reduce the risk of fire in our neighborhood, we should prohibit the fire station from sounding its alarms. Okay, so that's an error in reasoning. But this is not the appeal to ignorance. This is like a false cause, right? Where you think that one thing is causing another due to their temporal proximity. This is sometimes called the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. And not appeal to ignorance because we're not appealing to a lack of evidence. Okay, let's move along here, see if we can't get this. Okay, this looks good. This is sort of the hallmark setup for it. So Mr. Jones insists that he was at home sleeping peacefully when the murder occurred, and yet he is unable to produce a single person to confirm his alibi. Clearly, Mr. Jones is lying and he is the murderer. Okay, does commit a fallacy and does commit the appeal to ignorance. Why? Well, what's happening here is that somebody's saying, look, he's got no evidence to confirm that this is what he was doing. And so I then conclude, because he can't prove that he was doing this, in fact, he wasn't. He's a liar. He is the murderer. And that's the classic appeal to ignorance, where you say because there's a lack of evidence for something that either proves that something is the case or isn't, when in fact that is never the case. Lack of evidence only proves lack of evidence. It doesn't show whether something is or isn't the case. Okay. Let's take a look at hasty generalization. This is a pretty common one, also sometimes called the stereotyping fallacy. And the deal here is that you'll take a small set or a small sample of something and then generalize to everybody. And this is hasty because you don't have enough sample to make that sort of generalization. We do generalization reasoning in some cases, like when we do think of the elections where they take polls of how people are planning to vote. Well, we don't poll everybody in the United States. We'll poll maybe thousands of people and then extrapolate from that, make a generalization, and then say, well, here is how somebody is likely to do in the polls based on this large sample that we have. In the hasty generalization, it's generally not thousands. It's a few cases. You can say, well, everybody must be like this based on my few cases I've seen it. All right. All right, this first one looks good in the sense that it's going to commit the fallacy. So I saw 3 teenagers skipping school and playing poker in a neighbor's garage last week. That's the sort of evidence they have. They conclude high school students are just a bunch of truant hoodlums these days. Okay, that does and does. Why? Well, they took a limited data point, right? One example. I saw 3 teenagers skipping school. And then say, well, this is really applying to all of them. Like all high school students are just a bunch of truant hoodlums these days. That's clearly a reach in your reasoning. That is not supported by the evidence you have. Let's see if we can't get one that isn't. Recent statistics suggest that the odds of being killed in a plane crash are about 1 in 11 million. By contrast, the chances of being killed in an automobile accident are 1 in 5,000. So there's no reason for you to fear flying more than you fear riding in a car. Okay. So this one, I could go either way on this. And this is what I'm going to say with respect to passage G. So somebody gives these stats, and they say, well, here's why you shouldn't fear flying more than you fear riding the car. I'm going to say, well, what I think this probably is, it does commit a fallacy, even though there's some kernel of truth to this, right? There's little reason, is probably what they should say, to fear flying more than riding your car based on the odds, right? You're way more likely to die in a car crash than you are in a plane crash. But somebody may have missed the point here. It doesn't commit the hasty generalization fallacy. They're not talking about limited samples. In fact, these are big, robust samples. If this is going to be something, it's likely to be missing the point, where somebody says, okay, I'm afraid of flying, and they give their reasons. And it's generally not for statistical reasons. It's something else that has to do with, I have a very little control in the case of the airplane crash, where people feel they have more control in the automobile accident case. So I could see that there. Although I'm also anticipating that if I were to click rate it now, and I'll show you here in a second what it gives me, that does not commit a hasty generalization fallacy, but I can see it going either way here. What really I don't like about the wording here is that there's no reason for you to fear flying more than a car, and I think that's what tips this to towards the fallacy rather than not. If this was little reason, that seems pretty straightforward. So we're good there. And in this case, this is what they gave me. So, heads up on passage G, even though I think there's an error here, this is the way the program's going to grade it, because this is reasonable given the statistics. Okay. Let's take a look then at false cause. False cause is a case where you reason that two things happen together pretty close in time generally, and that one is then causing the other, when in fact there's probably no causal relationship if you think about it a little bit. So let's see what we get here. Pressure on the gas pedal sends fuel into the engine and causes the car to move, so if you want the car to move, you need to press the pedal on the gas. Okay, well that is not fallacious and doesn't commit the false cause fallacy. This is one of those actual cause cases. You put pressure on the gas pedal, the ECU in the car picks that up, sends fuel to the engine, causes the car to move. If you want the car to move, you need to put the pedal on the gas. Yeah. I mean, you might quibble with this and say, well, you could get it to move by putting it in neutral and pushing it. Fine. I'm anticipating that's not what they meant here, so let's leave that alone. Let's see if we can find one that is a false cause. Okay. Most of the time, after a priest administers last rites to an ill patient, the patient dies soon thereafter. Hence, there should be a law against priests administering last rites. All right, let's say, yes, that does commit a fallacy. The fallacy is false cause. Why? Because the person here is suggesting that it's the priest administering the last rites that's causing the death. That's why they want the priest administering last rites to be banned. But we should recognize, well, this is just a coincidental relationship. It's a correlation, not a causation. The last rites and the patients die soon thereafter, typically that relationship is because the patient is already dying and the last rites are administered as a religious thing and not as something to either attempt to cure or hurt the patient. So, this doesn't cause that, false cause. Alright. Slippery slope. Come on, slippery slope. Slippery slope. The way this works is somebody sets up a situation where they think that if we allow something over here, then by necessity we're going to slide down this slope till we end up allowing something we don't want, and that would be kind of ridiculous, right? So the idea is they start with something that seems reasonable to allow, but then they try to argue, well, if we allowed that, we're going to slide down this slope by sort of logical necessity is the idea, until we end up allowing something that's really horrible. And the idea is that they're committing this fallacy because the slope is rarely that slippery. There are cases where we could allow something in one place and then set up a stop before we slide down into this really awful place. So let's take a look and see if we can't find something here. With the government's giving multi-billion-dollar loans to the auto industry and spending hundreds of billions to bail out financial firms, we are well on our way to nationalizing all of our nation's industries. It won't be long before we're a socialist economy. Perfect. Does commit a fallacy, and this is the slippery slope. Why? Because they're going from this one case, right, the government bailed out the auto loans, or bailed out the auto industry, and they think, well, this is just the slope to start to go to absolute socialism. Our free market economy is going to go by the wayside. And what I ought to recognize there is that, well, no, we wouldn't have to go that far. The case of the government giving the multi-billion-dollar loans to the auto industry was an exceptional case. The decision was made based on the fact that those industries would flounder otherwise. They were part of the backbone of the American industrial system. Millions of people, maybe not millions, overstretch. Thousands of people would lose their jobs if those places went under, so they made a decision in that case to help them out. But they weren't saying, well, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to do that with everything now, and every other organization in the country will be set up this way. It was only for an exceptional case where it was deemed that was necessary to save those institutions from completely failing. Okay. And about out of time on this, the last one up, let's go back, is the weak analogy case, which I already talked a little about earlier. And the hallmark here is that I'm going to compare two things, and the comparison is not going to be very good, right? If you recall earlier that guitar-cello case, that was the weak analogy case. You're looking for something similar here. Somebody compares something, and it seems like, okay, there's a little bit of similarity, but there's not enough to justify really drawing the conclusions they do because the analogy is not as strong as they seem.